an entrepreneur or thinking about becoming an entrepreneur or thinking about becoming a startup or you are thinking about investing in a startup, then you need to listen to this interview with Steve Case, founder of AOL and the author of this brand new book that I spent the weekend reading, The Rise of the Rest: How Entrepreneurs in Surprising Places Are Building the New American Dream. It was a travel log of entrepreneurial success. The Rise of the Rest is actually, it's probably going to change your approach to investing and maybe to startups. You're going to start looking in new places. Steve Case, welcome back. I had you on when the third wave came out, but The Rise of the Rest, I love this book.
Well, thank you, Hugh. It's great to be back with you.
Now, I want to remind people you're the founder of AOL. You're also the CEO of Revolution. What is Revolution, Steve Case?
It's an investment firm I started after I left AOL to back the next generation of entrepreneurs, but we've had a bias of investing in entrepreneurs not in Silicon Valley. Most of the venture capital goes to entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. Actually, if you look at the data over the last decade, 75% of venture capital has gone to just three states: California, New York, and Massachusetts. So we try to back entrepreneurs in other places, what we call the rise of the rest. As you said, I wrote this book because after spending a lot of the last decade traveling around dozens and dozens of cities, backing a couple hundred different entrepreneurs, it's remarkable what's happening all across the nation. But that's not a story that doesn't get much attention. Most of the investors aren't paying attention. It's harder for the entrepreneurs in these cities outside of the coast to create companies, and therefore it's hard for those communities to benefit from the job creation that comes from new companies. So part of this is about investments, but part of it also is about creating more opportunity for more people in more places.
It ought to be read by every city council member and every staff member and every economic development unit, because you cover Detroit and Pittsburgh and Cleveland. I mean, Johnny Cash, I've been everywhere, man. Nashville, Atlanta, Dallas, you name it. You've been there in the bus. And so I want to talk about that. But before I do, the U.S. Semi-Quintennial Commission is one thing. The Smithsonian is another. I want to salute you for chairing the Smithsonian celebration of our 250th birthday in a few years. How much time does that take for you, Steve Case?
It doesn't take too much time. It depends on what's going on. I've been on the board of Regents. They call it for about a little over a decade. I've been the chair for the last couple of years. It's a great institution. We have 19 museums, but part of the focus actually has been on creating more of a virtual Smithsonian. And some people are able to come to Washington, D.C. and see the various Smithsonian museums, air and space and natural history, American history, and so forth. But most people aren't. So we're trying to take the Smithsonian to them. So eventually the Smithsonian can be in every home and every classroom.
Now, Steve, I want to go back to The Rise of the Rest and Revolution. The Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I have invested over the years in probably a half dozen startups. Envase, which has done very well, logistics. News item by John Ellis, most recently. Seabag, Decision Insight. We've always made our decisions on whom to invest in based upon the credibility of the founder and their energy level. I think I never really looked at where they are. And now any future investments we make as friends and family round unfolds, I'm going to start looking at where they are, because you've opened my eyes to the idea that you really want to support startups that are in places that support startups.
Yeah, and it's part of the problem we've had in the country is that because in the tech world, the startup world, what some call the innovation economy, a lot of the capital is in a few places like Silicon Valley. There's often a tendency, people, growing up in Ohio or Wisconsin or Michigan are going to school there to leave, kind of a little bit of a brain drain in some communities, because they feel like they have to be someplace else if they want to participate in the startup sector, in part because that's where most of the money is. And so we have to address that. We have to make sure entrepreneurs who have ideas can start a company anywhere. And the job creation and economic growth and vitality that comes from new companies can happen everywhere. And that really will create more opportunity, more jobs, more of a participation in the future. A lot of people obviously do feel left out and left behind. The things that we're celebrating in Silicon Valley don't seem to really be helping them. In some cases, even they're hurting them. And so how do you create this opportunity that new companies that start with a little idea, but sometimes can be very significant companies, develop? I mean, every Fortune 500 company starts as a startup. So we have to be seeding these companies, and we can't just do it in Silicon Valley, New York, Boston. We have to do it all across the country. And that's what Rise of the Rest is about. And I think anybody reading the book will see a more optimistic view of the future, and also realize that entrepreneurs who are basically just like all of us. They just see a problem and say, I'm going to go solve that problem. And they solve it by creating a new company that addresses that. So anybody really can really, if they have an idea, they can join the entrepreneurial world, and they don't have to move somewhere to participate. That's the key message.
I'm going to talk with you about Detroit and Stick.com. I'm going to talk to you about Jobs for Ohio. We're going to talk about Catalyte, which is really very interesting to me. Repley, lots of different places, lots of different cities. But first, there are 1,400 venture firms, 1,400 investment firms. They go through pitch after pitch. You put in the Rise of the Rest advice on making a pitch. Do you want to summarize that for people who are out there trying to raise money?
Well, first of all, the 1,400 are actually the new firms that have started just in the last decade in these rise and rest cities, which is why it's now easier to raise capital no matter where you are. Most people don't know that, but it's really been a kind of a phenomenon. In terms of the pitches, as you said in your own introduction, part of it is the founder, and do they have sort of the vision in terms of addressing some big problem. But it's also not just about the founder. It's also about the team. We've learned that entrepreneurship is a team sport. So do they have the right people that bring the right perspectives? And increasingly, that also is industry perspective, kind of around a particular industry, healthcare or food and agriculture. People need to understand those industries. Sometimes the disruptors in Silicon Valley can bring fresh ideas, but increasingly, you've got to be able to establish partnerships. So if you're in healthcare, working with the Mayo Clinic or working with the Cleveland Clinic or others are going to be important. So being closer to those organizations will be an advantage for the entrepreneurs in this next generation, which advantages sort of the rise of the rest of the cities. And you also just have to have some evidence that this is connecting. The kind of the mouse is eating the cheese kind of thing. What we call product market fit in the industry, but there's some evidence. It's not just an idea that you think is solving a problem, but other people are starting to rally around it. But it really is amazing, some of the stories. I remember one woman, a mom in suburban Indianapolis, was concerned about clean water, called their utility company to get her water tested. They said, we don't do that for people. And so she started this company, 120 Water, that now provides not just testing for consumers, but even sells that testing capability in big cities, including San Francisco. That was just a mom who said, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to go build a company. And she did it in Indianapolis.
Well, let me tell you, I've always said at the intersection of heartfelt need and technological innovation, there is opportunity that cannot be measured. The best example of that is ShearShare. I can attest that when stylists develop a bond with their clients, that bond lasts a long time. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt is very, 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 very picky. I think they're like two people who've cut her hair on both coasts over the course of 30 years. ShearShare it's really an amazing story, Steve Case. Will you tell people about it?
Yeah, a couple in Texas, basically said most of these salons have empty chairs. A lot of the people that are, doing hair have to work full time for a salon. Why does that make sense? It's sort of like they saw Airbnb and they created what they jokingly called Airbnb, where basically stylists can rent a chair in a salon for an hour, for a half a day, for a day, and then wherever their clients are, work directly with them. So their clients don't have to call the salon. They can call the stylist directly. The stylist doesn't have to work full time for a salon and share the revenue with the salon. They basically can be their own independent, kind of agent, their own entrepreneur, if you will, and that they just pay for the chair and then they basically work to get clients to come in to see them in that place. That also gives them the flexibility to be in different salons over different periods of time. So it's an example of just it's what seems like a simple idea, but now turned into a pretty significant company because rather than just talk about the problem, they said, let's go fix it. And they started a company that we found out on our Rise the Rest tour in Texas.
Yeah, when we invested in Secure Space, which has subsequently been acquired by Envays, the founder of Secure Space said, look, freight moves around the United States, and sometimes unexpectedly they have to park somewhere. So we're going to be the Airbnb of empty parking lots. And boy, did they become the Airbnb of empty parking. It's just the opportunity. Someone knows what they're doing in logistics. They see the need, and they need someone to help invest. Usually it's friends and family, Steve. Is it still friends and family in most cases, or are these venture firms actually letting bright young people come up with ideas and moving them forward?
First of all, on the logistics, we backed a company we were in Chattanooga called FreightWaves that was doing a kind of like a Bloomberg data platform for the trucking industry. I didn't know this till we were in Chattanooga, but many of the biggest trucking companies are headquartered in Chattanooga.
Yep.
So you're going to build a technology like that, a product like that. Better to be in Chattanooga than to be in New York City or San Francisco. In terms of friends and family, part of the challenge we're trying to address, which is why we're encouraging more of these regional venture firms, is for a lot of people when they have an idea, they can fund it themselves, or they have friends and family that can help get it launched. But not everybody has friends and family with money,
Right.
so we have to figure out ways to open up, the venture capital to everybody. That's part of the reason why for the last decade we've traveled around the country. We've now partnered with 300 regional venture firms, so we co-invest with them. We've got to find entrepreneurs in places where historically the investors haven't been looking, and we've got to find entrepreneurs who have big ideas, big dreams, but may not yet have the money or access to the money to turn that into a company. And there are a lot of examples in the book of entrepreneurs who've done just that.
But let me go to the only place where we disagree, and it's not even a disagreement; it's just a different emphasis. On page 184, you write, the influential tech podcast All In reported on the dramatic shift that had taken place during the pandemic, noting that states like Florida, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee had seen dramatic jumps in people moving there, while other states saw declines, including California, New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts. I'm going to stop right there. There's a reason for that, Steve Case. It's called the tax rate, the marginal tax rate. And entrepreneurs are going where the taxes are low. Did All In note that?
Yeah, they did in part. Obviously, the tax rate does influence where people are settling, but also increasingly in these what we call rise of the rest cities, it's that domain expertise that also is driving it. People make decisions around where to live. Some of it is obviously tax related. Some of it is that's where they grew up and they want to raise their family. Some of that is the particular industry expertise. Some of that is cost of living, cost of operating. If you are starting a company in many of these rising cities, and you are able to raise money, that money goes 2 or 3 times further than if you were in San Francisco or New York. Those are expensive cities. So obviously there are many different factors, and you're right. The tax factor is a big consideration for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Let me switch now to Detroit because Dan Gilbert is featured in Rise of the. I love Dan Gilbert. I've always admired him. I admire, by the way, he sticks by his kids, and I admired the way that he's run the Cavaliers. I admire a lot about Dan Gilbert, and he's a big deal. I'm a Clevelander, Northeastern Ohio kid, so I love Dan Gilbert. Here you are writing about him in Detroit, though. It's what he did for Cleveland that matters to me, but I guess you're right. I'm going to Detroit this week for a political event, Steve Case. Tell people about Dan Gilbert and why every city like Detroit needs a Dan Gilbert.
Well, interesting. I was just in Detroit a week ago. Forbes has an under 30 summit where they get a couple thousand people from around the country to go to Detroit. And we worked with them to get that in Detroit, partly with Dan Gilbert. But the story of Detroit is 100 years ago. In many ways, Detroit was the Silicon Valley of its time. The automobile was the technology of the day. Everybody wanted to be part of that car revolution. So people flocked to Detroit and grew like crazy. Back then, by the way, Silicon Valley was just agriculture. It was fruit orchards. So it's a lot's changed in the last 100 years. So Detroit had all this momentum, but then lost it. It really lost its sort of entrepreneurial mojo and lost 60% of its population. And the year before we came on our Rise the Rest bus, that had been about 9 years ago, the city of Detroit went bankrupt. And so it just really fell into hard times. But the work particularly led by Dan Gilbert, a great entrepreneur who ended up moving his company downtown in Detroit and bought 100 buildings that were basically vacant in Detroit. And he said, I'm going to rebuild Detroit. He worked with others, the mayor and the foundations like Presty, but he really has revitalized that city. We've now backed more than a dozen companies in Detroit, including a company called Shinola that makes watches, and StockX that's the stock exchange for things. Both of these were just ideas a decade ago. Now they have thousands of employees. And it's really revitalizing, renewing a city that was on hard times. And that's really the story of entrepreneurship. And that's why I wrote this book. The new companies are the big job creators. So we need to back new companies everywhere. We need to back those entrepreneurs everywhere. So they're challenging the status quo, looking at problems in new ways, attacking some of the big industries that need change, like healthcare with fresh ideas. And in the process, just as we saw in Detroit, those communities start rising again, jobs start getting created again, and it creates more hope and opportunity all across the country, not just for a few entrepreneurs in a few places like Silicon Valley.
Now, Steve Case, I'm a Virginian like you are, and all 3 of my kids are in Virginia like you are in Virginia. I don't know where your children are, but I want to talk about Ohio. I want to talk about Cleveland specifically and Ohio jobs, but I also have to make sure we talk about Catalyte and Repley. So let's start with Catalyte. The idea that the resume doesn't matter as much as people think and that you're looking for a skills-based software engineering community. I hope Catalyte is growing like leaps and bounds because this does remove an impediment to entry by people with talent. Would you explain why you back Catalyte and what it is?
Yeah, it's really an amazing story that a lot of people who have a certain aptitude, a certain talent for something, it's never really discovered. When they're in school, nobody says you're great at this. If you're a great athlete, that people can identify it. If you're a great musician, people can identify it. But that doesn't necessarily, apply to other kind of capabilities. And so this company, Catalyte in Baltimore, said they wanted to use artificial intelligence, AI, to identify sort of the talent people have that that's been undiscovered. And in particular, they focused on coding, kind of writing, software code. And they created this program where people who have never coded, maybe when they were growing up, nobody even told them coding was an option. And it identifies the people that would be good at that. And the ones who are then good at that, Catalyte then trains in places and jobs that make a lot of money. I remember one example was there was a UPS truck driver. Nobody talked to him about coding or technology when he was growing up. But suddenly he was on a different career trajectory. He was making, I think it was 3 times more in terms of how much he made because he got this expertise around coding, because Catalyte was able to kind of unearth that he would be good at that. And so that's just a great example of an entrepreneur happened to be in Baltimore that said, how do we make sure that the talents that people have, they really realize and you can build on them? The school system doesn't necessarily do that as effectively as it should. So a company like Catalyte stopped stepping into
That can revolutionize hiring. I'm just convinced that can revolutionize hiring. Let me go to Repley, because Dr. Gary Cooper, I'm going to remember his name. I'm going to remember him as the cart guy. I love the story, by the way. Well told. Tell people about the cart guy, because I bet you there are labs full of excess stuff all over the country that Repley is getting to.
Yeah, this guy Gary was basically, as you said, the cart guy. He worked in a particular hospital, and he realized that some things in his department they needed somewhere else, somewhere in the hospital had that was unused, and vice versa. So he started loading things on a cart, and kind of walking around the hospital, and people would say, "Oh, I need one of these," or they'd contribute one of those, and then he left because he moved on, and people really missed Gary and the cart guy. He said, there's a bigger idea here. And he started his company called Repley that's in Chicago that basically is a platform to share things. And a lot of different organizations now are using this. It saves them money, and it's also good in terms of what people call the circular economy in terms of climate. Rather than building a bunch of things and just throwing them away, it gets reused to other people that have that need. And so that's another example.
I just think it's the greatest example in the book.
Stumbled onto a problem and turned it into a company, and now it's creating lots of jobs in Chicago.
So let's close on what is clearly the best place for entrepreneurs right now, Ohio. And what do you think is going to happen in Columbus with Intel going? You've got a great segment on jobsohio.com, the Ohio Innovation Fund. I mean, you know the Cleveland story. But now Intel's dropping down 2 fab plants in the middle of Columbus. I told my youngest the other day, hey, if you're looking to go somewhere, go to Columbus. You can still buy a house. You can begin plying the, what do you call it, the economy around the economy, the whole wheel.
Right, kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, the ecosystem is going to, what do you think Columbus is going to look like in 30 years?
No, Columbus is definitely on the rise. We were there on our bus tour, I think, 7 years ago, and you can see some interesting things bubbling. Great university there with Ohio State, and a lot of big companies that were anchoring different industries. But the startup sector was starting to show real momentum, and things have really accelerated. About 5 years ago, they won a transportation challenge for smart cities of the future, and you got a lot of attention around that. And more recently, as you mentioned, Intel, which helped build Silicon Valley. They were the semiconductor company that really helped put Silicon Valley on the map. Just broke ground a few weeks ago in Columbus, Ohio, on a major semiconductor plant. They said, we're going to help build the Silicon Heartland. And a lot of venture capital is now focusing on Columbus. We have a number of investments there, and it really is an example. And there are dozens of others. We profile about 30 different cities in this book, over 40 different entrepreneurs doing interesting things with different industries. And my main takeaway, which is why I decided to write the book, is I've had the opportunity to travel around over this past decade and meet a lot of people and see a lot of cities. And it's always striking to me what's happening. And I go back and tell people about it. They have no idea what's happening in Columbus, no idea what's happening in Minneapolis, no idea what's happening in Nashville, or I could list dozens of other cities. And I said, this is a great story for those cities. I think it's a great story for America that if we're backing these entrepreneurs everywhere, and not just in the places like Silicon Valley, but truly all across the country. and they start growing and creating jobs and driving economic growth and paying taxes, and can really lift up these communities, renew these communities, create more hope and opportunity in these communities, and that also can help strengthen the nation. So it's a much bigger idea here than just backing a entrepreneur by investing in them in a particular city. We're trying to really build a momentum for this idea of leveling the playing field so everybody everywhere really does have a shot at the American dream.
I also want people to, he admonishes local media in The Rise of the Rest, Steve Case does, to cover these stories. Now, the Youngstown Vindicator gets me a newsletter almost every day about some startup in the Steel Valley, which has been long ignored and is now popping with a lot of new businesses. I just want to close there. Local media should be covering this stuff, Steve Case, because national media, unless you were on a book tour for Rise of the Rest, national media is not going to pay much attention to something like Share. But local media should make their bread and butter off of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. My own experience, I started America Online AOL in Northern Virginia in 1985. At the time, only 3% of people were online, and those 3% were only online 1 hour a week. It was pretty early days, and when we said we wanted to get America Online, we really were serious about it. But for the first decade, it was a struggle. Really hard to raise capital, really hard to hire people from big companies to join our little company, and really hard to get attention from the media. And so it just was, we were kind of up there on the side. And so I think everybody in the community needs to recognize the role these entrepreneurs play, and not just innovating with new products and services, but creating the companies that create the jobs that lift up the community. So part of the reason to write the book was to inspire people who have ideas to consider starting companies, to encourage investors who are on the coast to be backing entrepreneurs in other parts of the country, to encourage mayors to pay more and governors to pay more attention, not to getting a big company to move, but helping to launch more new companies that can really thrive, and also getting people, including media, to start telling these stories. That we shouldn't have to show up in a city on our bus to have people paying attention to what the entrepreneurs are doing, but we have seen sometimes that happens. So we're happy to do it. We'll keep fighting a good fight. We'll keep traveling around the country trying to find the entrepreneurs of the future, building the companies of the future, really the industries of the future. But we really want everybody to recognize that something has been quietly bubbling over the next decade, which bodes well for this next chapter in the American story.
It does. Readers of The Rise of the Rest will be cheered in a way perhaps they haven't been in a long time. It's a great, optimistic story. Steve Case, thank you for joining me again. Keep taking that bus around and go back to Ohio, Steve Case.
All right. Thank you, Hugh. Always great talking to you.
Thank you.